All right, let's dive in. Looks like we're tackling procrastination today, huh? With Brian Tracy's Eat That Frog. I gotta say, that title really caught my eye.
Yeah, it definitely grabs your attention, and it really drives home the main point of the book, too.
Right. So we're gonna break down all the key takeaways, especially that whole eating frogs metaphor.
Yeah.
And how it connects to the 80-20 rule, What are your first impressions?
Well, the idea of starting your day by tackling the biggest, most challenging task to kind of build momentum for the rest of the day, it's a pretty powerful concept. I am curious, though, about how Tracy actually defines this frog and how we can figure out what it is in our own lives.
That's a great point. This book isn't about just picking something hard to do. It's about really being smart about what you prioritize. That frog, it represents your most crucial task for that day. The one that, if you get it done, will have the biggest positive impact.
And it's not just about being busy, is it? It's about focusing on those tasks that actually get you measurable results.
Exactly. So let's say you're working on this big project, like launching a new product line. Your frog, it might not be answering every single email. It might be, finalizing that marketing strategy that will really make or break the launch. It's about doing the things that actually move you forward, right?
Makes a lot of sense. It's all about choosing tasks that are aligned with your goals. And speaking of goals, Tracy has this really interesting statistic. Only 3% of adults write down their goals. But, get this, they achieve way more than those who don't, like 5 to 10 times more. He lays out the 7-step formula for setting goals, which emphasizes writing them down, setting deadlines, and taking action consistently.
That was a big takeaway for me, for sure. It's one thing to have an idea of what you want to achieve, but when you actually write it down, make it tangible, it's like something shifts.
Absolutely. It becomes a commitment, a contract with yourself. And when you write it down, it makes you really think about what you want and visualize that outcome. Have you ever tried that with your own goals?
Yeah, I have. And when I don't write things down, they just kind of float around in my head and never really gain any traction. But as soon as I put pen to paper, it becomes real. Actionable. Which brings us to our next point, taming that time monster. We all have the same 24 hours, but how we use them is what makes all the difference, right?
Exactly. This is where the 80-20 rule comes in. It says that 80% of your results come from just 20% of your efforts. Now, thinking about work specifically, have you noticed any patterns that might reflect this principle?
That's a good question. I have noticed that I often get bogged down responding to emails, which doesn't really contribute directly to my main goals of writing and creating content. So maybe I am spending 80% of my time on something that only produces 20% of the value.
Yeah, it's easy to fall into that trap. We tend to prioritize what's urgent over what's truly important. Tracy calls this the law of forced efficiency. Basically, he argues that you'll never have enough time for everything, but you will always have enough time for the most important things. To help figure out what's vital and what's just busy work, he presents this system called the ABCDE method.
Yeah. This was a big aha moment for me. It's such a simple but effective way to prioritize things. You categorize your tasks as A, B, C, D, or E, A tasks. Those are your big, ugly frogs, the ones with serious consequences if you don't handle them. Then you have B tasks. They're less urgent, like those tadpoles we were talking about. And the key is never let a B task distract you from an A task.
Right. And then we have the C tasks. They're nice to do, but they don't really make a difference in your goals. D tasks should be delegated whenever possible to free up your time. And E tasks, just get rid of them. They're wasting your precious time without giving you anything back.
I definitely had a few of those hiding in my to-do list. What I found helpful was this method really makes you think about each task and give it a value. It helps break that cycle of just reacting to whatever pops up first.
Absolutely. It's about being proactive, taking charge of your workflow. Now, we've been talking about external factors, but Tracy makes a point of saying that a lot of what holds us back is internal. It's our own habits and skills.
Yeah. He wants us to look inward and really assess our strengths and weaknesses, right? He even asks, what one skill, if you mastered it, would have the biggest impact on your career right now?
That's a really powerful question. It forces us to go beyond just surface-level productivity hacks and look deeper into our own personal development. And this leads us to the next big obstacle a lot of us face, procrastination. Procrastination, right, it's something we all deal with. But Tracy has some really practical advice for how to combat it. One that I found helpful was the salami slice or Swiss cheese method. Basically, you break down those big, intimidating tasks into smaller, more manageable pieces.
I love those names. They're so visual. And they perfectly describe the technique. Have you ever tried breaking down a project like that?
I have, and it's actually really effective. It's way easier to get yourself to work on a small slice of something than to tackle the whole thing all at once. And you know what I've found? Even just starting and finishing a small piece of a task can give you a sense of accomplishment. And that motivates you to keep going.
Yeah, it's like you start building momentum and suddenly the task doesn't seem so overwhelming anymore.
Exactly. And then there's the idea of creative procrastination. It's basically putting off those low-value tasks on purpose so you can make time for those important frogs.
So we're giving ourselves permission to procrastinate, but strategically. I like that. But it's not just about tactics, right? It's about cultivating the right mindset too. Tracy talks about the power of momentum and urgency.
He does. The momentum principle says that it takes a lot of energy to get started. But once you're in motion, it takes far less energy to keep going. Like, think about pushing a heavy object. At first, it takes a ton of effort, but once it starts rolling, it becomes easier to keep it moving. And to maintain that momentum, it's important to develop a sense of urgency, that internal drive to act quickly and decisively.
So it's like having that internal clock ticking, reminding us that time is valuable. But how do we create that sense of urgency without getting stressed out or overwhelmed?
That's where focusing on the most important task comes in. When we prioritize and tackle our frogs first, we naturally create that sense of urgency because we know those tasks have the biggest impact. And when we see the positive results of that, it reinforces that sense of urgency.
It's like training our brains to zero in on what really matters. Another concept that stuck with me was single handling. That's where you concentrate on one task at a time until it's completely finished. Tracy actually says that starting and stopping can make tasks take 500% longer.
Yeah, it's so easy to fall into that multitasking trap. But all the research shows that it's not effective. Our brains aren't wired to handle multiple complex tasks at the same time, and that constant switching back and forth actually drains our energy and makes it harder to focus.
I am so guilty of having like a million tabs open on my computer thinking I'm being productive. But really, I'm just spreading myself too thin.
We've all been there. But think about how satisfying it feels to actually complete a task before moving on to the next one. It's like you're honoring the commitment you made to yourself to focus on that one thing.
And that ties back to the idea of building character, right? Tracy emphasizes that persistence, sticking with a task until it's done, is self-discipline in action.
It's about building that inner strength, that resilience. And when we practice single handling, we gain more self-respect and confidence. And that leads to even greater achievements. It's a positive cycle.
That's a really empowering way to think about it. It's clear from all these strategies that eating your frog is a skill, not just something you're born with.
Exactly. It's something we can learn and improve upon with practice, which is encouraging because it means we're not stuck with our current habits. We can develop new, more productive ones.
One of the biggest takeaways for me is the importance of clarity. Knowing exactly what you want and why it's important, that seems to be crucial.
Clarity fuels motivation. It's like having a compass to keep you on track, even when things get tough.
And speaking of tough, we've talked about those internal roadblocks like fear, limiting beliefs, or not having the right skills. So being honest with yourself about those seems pretty important, doesn't it?
Absolutely. It's the first step to any kind of personal growth. And once you've figured out what those roadblocks are, you can start working on them. Remember, anything can be learned. There are resources, strategies, and mentors out there to help.
It's about having a growth mindset, that belief that you can always improve. Another thing that really resonated with me was the importance of taking care of yourself. It's so easy to forget about self-care when we're trying to be productive.
That's true. Our energy levels directly impact how well we focus and how much we get done. It's not selfish to prioritize things like sleep, eating healthy, and doing things that are good for your mind and body. It's actually essential for performing at your best. You can't pour from an empty cup, right?
Very wise words. Tracy doesn't really go in depth on self-care, but I do think it's something important to keep in mind, especially when we're facing those big, challenging tasks.
I agree. It's about finding that sweet spot between pushing yourself and also recognizing when you need to rest and recharge. So as we're wrapping up our exploration of Eat That Frog, Andre, I'm curious, what has resonated most with you? What are some key insights you're taking away from this deep dive?
Oh, so much. The thing about writing down your goals really got to me. I've done it here and there, but knowing that it can really boost your chances of success, well, that's pretty convincing. And that ABCDE method, I can already see how using those labels is going to help me feel less overwhelmed by my to-do list.
Those are great takeaways. Sounds like you're already starting to think about how to apply these ideas to your own life.
Definitely. And it's made me think about something Tracy talks a lot about, identifying your biggest frog, that most important task you need to tackle first. But what if, when after you finally get the courage to eat it, you realize it wasn't actually a frog at all?
Interesting. What do you mean?
Well, like, what if that task we were so afraid of, the one we built up in our minds to be this giant obstacle, what if it turns out it was actually a great opportunity? Something that seemed scary at first, but ended up being really rewarding.
I like that. It makes you question those assumptions and not let fear control you. It's like that saying, everything you want is on the other side of fear, right?
Exactly. And that brings me to something else that Tracy doesn't directly say, but it feels like it's part of his message. This whole process of eating our frogs, facing those challenges head on, it's not just about being productive, is it? It's also about building resilience, and courage.
Absolutely. When we tackle those tasks that make us uncomfortable over and over again, we're training ourselves to face any obstacle with more confidence. It's like we're building up our mental muscles.
Exactly. And that confidence, it carries over into other parts of our lives too. The more we practice eating those frogs, the more comfortable we get stepping outside our comfort zone, taking risks, and ultimately reaching our potential, right?
Well said. It's about shifting our perspective from one of avoiding things to one of feeling empowered. And it's an ongoing journey. There will always be frogs to eat, but the key is to learn how to face them.
This whole deep dive has been a great reminder to not let those frogs just sit there, to stop putting off the things that really matter.
And remember, this process of figuring out what your frogs are and actually eating them, it takes time to develop that skill. It's not about being perfect overnight, but about making steady progress. Start small, celebrate your wins, and always keep learning.
Great advice. So as we wrap up our deep dive into Eat That Frog, I'm feeling really motivated, and I hope you are too. What's your biggest frog right now? What's one step you can take today to start eating it? Maybe it's writing down that goal you've been avoiding, finally delegating that time-consuming task, or just making a promise to yourself to focus on one thing for the next hour. Whatever it is, take that step and you'll be amazed at what you can accomplish. Thanks for joining us.